We changed yours to be 5 seconds per slide, just to add up a little bit more.
With me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's the poetry of Paris. Right there.
So, I can definitely start a little bit with an introduction. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my background in the humanities. I've titled this "The Unacknowledged Legislators of the World." That is not my quote. Don't attribute it to me. It's Percy Shelley, who was a romantic poet. And you're looking at his dead body right now, sort of. And oh, it's going. So this is me. I was in a PhD program before I came to Harris in English. All I wanted to do was be an English professor, and I left with a master's degree. And a lot of you have asked me, like, what is it that you actually do when you study literature professionally? So I'm going to try to answer that question. And it all started with this asshole Plato, who cast poets out of his republic, and he said, poetry is mimesis, it's an imitation of an imitation, and therefore it's not truth, and so we can't have it in our society. And he caused a lot of trouble, and we've been talking about it ever since. And actually what happens when you don't have poetry in your society is this. This is the apocalypse. This is what happens when you don't know how to feel or have empathy or how to think, really, at the end of the day. But enough of him, and back to Shelley. And Shelley wrote this great defense of poetry. And the last lines are really incredible. And they are, poets are the hierophants of an unapprehended inspiration, the mirrors of the gigantic shadows which futurity casts upon the present, the words which express what they understand not, the trumpets which sing to battle and feel not what they inspire, the influence which is moved not but moves. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And what he's saying here is he's saying, look, Plato, yes, poetry is about mirrors. It's about depicting something, but it's that depiction that's important. It's not the problem, it's the thing itself. It's the thing that causes us to have a conversation. And so he has this idea that poets are the conversation makers. And so in English departments, we talk a lot about this, but we also talk a lot about critical theory. And critical theory is Marxism. We think of Marxism as a literary thing. We talk about feminism, we talk about deconstruction. And deconstruction is something that was started by Derrida. And he has this idea of language and the text as not something that's benign. And so he would look at Magritte, which says, this is not a pipe. And he would say, of course, it is a pipe, but language tells us that it's not. And so there's something slippery about language. And what does it mean when we use language to construct our entire world, but it's not reliable? We have to rethink who we are as people. You also have something like object-oriented ontology, which says humanism is wrong. Humans aren't the center of the world, objects are. And so you have something like global warming, which they would say is a hyper-object that is so massive that humans can't even comprehend it. And you also have other things like critical animal studies. And they say, look, humans have defined ourselves in opposition to animals since the dawn of time. But what if this is a false dichotomy? How can we rethink who we are if we're not thinking about ourselves in juxtaposition with animals? And that made me think about Hamlet and Shakespeare and how Hamlet is constantly trying to think about what it means to be a man. And he says, what a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? And the animal people who study animal studies would say that, look, Shakespeare wrote everything that he ever penned on vellum. And what is vellum? Vellum is sheep, and the sheep will appear any moment. Vellum are sheep, and so that means that these great pieces of meditation on what it means to be human were actually written on the backs of animals. And so maybe we need to rethink who we are and how we define ourselves and our identities, just from this materialistic aspect. And so at Harris, we don't talk about these kind of things, really at all, ever. But I think about them, and I think that they're there under the surface. And I've been having these amazing conversations with a certain sweater vest inclined individual, Kerwin, about the humanities and economics. And he was telling me about this paper that this economist wrote about slavery. And basically the guy's thesis is that the South needed to go to war in order to protect slavery because slaves were profitable. Like, yes, you're not an original thinker. But the scholarship was really good and really impressive. And Kerwin was like, I really love it, but it doesn't explain this. You can't look at this and say this was caused because of profit and a desire for profit. And so sometimes you need other tools, and you need the humanities, I think. And so our conversation continued, and we started to talk about The Wealth of Nations, this founding text of economics. And Kerwin was telling me this incredible thing that if you get a PhD here at Harris, you never read this. It is not required reading. And that's really sad, because actually Adam Smith was a moral philosopher. Economists and talking about the economy comes out of the humanities. And so while he's remembered for The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith also wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, about how people behave. And that's really what we're studying when we're studying preferences. And so I thought that I had gone to this like strange and foreign land with all of these numbers, and really I was back to human behavior. And that made me think of John Adams. And John Adams wrote all of these incredible letters to his wife Abigail, and in one of them he starts to think about, why am I doing this? Like, why politics? Why war? Like, I really just want to be studying poetry. Like, he says this. He's great. And he says, I must study politics and war that my sons may have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, etc., in order to give their children a right to study painting and poetry, music, architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain. Which brings me back to another romantic poet, John Keats, who wrote Ode to a Grecian Urn. And the first lines of this poem are, thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time. And the final words are, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all you know on earth and all you need to know. And if you just give me a moment of sentimentality, I would just say that if we in this room do our jobs right, then maybe someday we can all get back to studying porcelain.
Any questions? There is Carlos. Great. I think you're right for the last presentation.
Thanks for sticking it out.
That happens when you take classes at booth. Yeah.
Do you have any favorite non-American or non-British poet?
Non-American or non-British poet, Baudelaire.
Baudelaire. Les Fleurs du Mal.
Yeah.
Do you also write poetry?
No, and that's a really common misconception. Actually, I get asked that question all the time, and I wish that I did, but they're two very different things. They're completely different, and so when I was doing this, I still think of myself as creative. There's a lot of creativity in trying to come up with new thoughts about poetry that's been written about forever and ever, but I don't write it myself. But I really admire what people do. Roberta.
If you tattooed a poem in your body, what would it be?
If I
If you tattooed
like if I tattooed a poem. I've thought a lot about this, and so it's a really complicated answer actually. A, because I'm Jewish, but that doesn't really matter, and B, because like Derrida says, language is slippery, it changes all the time. And I feel like it would be, for me, it would be a disservice to put any words on my body because you're trying to pin something down that doesn't deserve to be pinned down. That's how I look at it. Wow.
I'll do it myself this time with a clicker. Thank you everyone for coming. I just want to thank our speakers again. Guillermo for talking about a disordered biography. Becky for talking about what I learned from 5 years old. Turab, evidence-based policy in developing countries and aphorisms. Elena, how you changed the world. Ken, having the time biking and coding. Santi, being a Muslim in America. Trista, I didn't know you've got superpower. Barbara, how to be myself, a journey of self-identity from California to Chicago. And Isabelle, the unacknowledged legislators of the world, how poetry brought me to Harris. Thank you guys. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the presenters. I think that was really great. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think this was really what we were hoping for, that it's the start for looking beyond or below the surface, and really get to the core of people, as Barbara said, and talk about other stuff than just how to solve derivatives and how to read regressions. And we look forward to other events following. If you want to talk next time, so we plan this to be a series, just let us know. Any one of us, Marie, Fanel, Carlos, or I. And enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you to the